Hello, this is Dr. Glasbrenner from George Mason University, and in this video, we will learn how data visualization plays a key role in communicating information. There are several paths we can take through the core topics of data science, with a conventional approach being to learn how to manipulate and transform data first, and covering data visualization later in the curriculum. We will be flipping that order, and instead begin with data visualization. Part of the reason for this is practical, as visualization serves as a good introduction to using R. Beyond that, data visualization is important and deserves to be emphasized. This is because visualizations are key to communicating scientific findings and ideas to fellow experts and to the general public. And without effective communication, these ideas may go unnoticed. Anne Rowe encapsulated this idea in her book, The Making of a Scientist, when she wrote, quote, "Nothing in science has any value to society if it is not communicated, and scientists are beginning to learn their social obligations." Erwin Schrödinger, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, expressed a similar sentiment as follows, quote, "If you cannot, in the long run, tell everyone what you have been doing, your doing has been worthless," end quote. So visualization is important to communication, but it goes beyond that. Visualizations also let us explore and understand data in new ways that can expand our knowledge of the world. As John Tukey put it, quote, "The greatest value of a picture is when it forces us to notice what we never expected to see," end quote. So visualizations are a key communication tool and are a means to gaining insight. Finally, creating effective and high-quality visualizations fulfill an important human need, the need to tell stories. For numbers have an important story to tell. They rely on you to give them a clear and convincing voice, as Stephen Few summarized it. Al Shalloway put it even more simply. Visualizations act as the campfire around which we gather to tell stories. We don't need to keep talking about these ideas in the abstract, as there are plenty of real-world examples of visualizations in action. The late Steve Jobs was well known to give effective presentations, such as the keynote where he unveiled the first iPhone. Part of what made his presentations memorable were the simple and focused visuals that served as a series of helpful illustrations and as punctuation marks. An example of a visualization that really struck me and gave me insight was the interactive presentation called The Fallen of World War II. The sheer magnitude of the loss of life in World War II is hard to comprehend, and that's why I find this visual, and indeed this whole section of the presentation, haunting. This shows the amount of people that lost their lives each year over 3/4 of a century. Lives lost during World War II are shown in red, which is then compared with the lives lost in all major conflicts since then. Note that this graphic includes the Korean War in the 1950s and the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 70s. The difference is stark, and illustrates how disruptive this war was to civilization. On the other end of the spectrum are visualizations that are just confusing to look at. Take this example from the New York Times. Its goal is to allow viewers to see box office receipts over time for movies from 1986 through 2008. This would be fine if it weren't for the sheer volume of movies that were included in the dataset. In addition, the curves above and below the central horizontal axis represent different movies. It's hard to interpret, and it's far too busy. Depending on the context, getting visualizations right can be very important, and may even be a matter of life or death. Consider the Challenger disaster that took place on January 28, 1986. The Space Shuttle Challenger took off and, very suddenly, broke apart 73 seconds into flight, killing all 7 crew members on board. This happened because the rubber O-rings, which held the rockets together, had failed due to the low temperatures on launch day, below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. At least some people at the time knew this could end in disaster. The engineers at Morton Thiokol, who supplied solid rocket motors to NASA, warned about this on January 27, 1986 in a conference call. Unfortunately, NASA and the managers at Morton Thiokol overruled their concerns, unpersuaded by the engineers. Why didn't they listen to the engineers? While there are several reasons why, including concerns over losing money by canceling the launch, part of it was that the engineers tried to justify their concerns by presenting tables like this one. It's not really clear what's going on just by glancing at this chart. Certainly, if the idea is to issue a dire warning, this doesn't really seem like the most convincing way to achieve it. The mathematician and visualization guru Edward Tufte took strong issue with the way the engineers handled the data visualizations. He issued a critique and argued that the data should have been presented like this, where there is a damage index defined and plotted against the launch temperature. This makes it clear that there are huge risks with O-ring damage when launching in temperatures of 55 degrees or lower. The Space Shuttle Challenger was launched at a temperature almost half that of the known O-ring failures. And from this graph, it would have been more of a surprise if the O-rings didn't fail given the conditions. Unfortunately, the visualization problems continued in the Challenger congressional hearings. So-called chart junk, like this graphic, were presented in the hearings instead of a plot like the one Tufte suggested. This just served to further confuse the issue, as again, the figure is busy and it's not immediately clear what is going on. The darker side of data visualization is well expressed in the book How to Lie with Statistics by Darrell Huff, which was published in 1954. It's worth mentioning that the book title is meant to be tongue-in-cheek and has been misunderstood. It's also not a guide for or a discussion about the different ways that you can fudge the numbers or cook the books with statistics. It's instead an illustration of the ways that data visualizations can be manipulated such that they are misleading, but technically show accurate information. Across multiple examples, there's a general trend in this kind of misinformation, which is to violate conventions and audience expectations. Let's consider a couple of examples of how this might work. In our first example, we look at a data visualization showing the number of gun deaths in Florida over time. Before I show the visualization, let's review the context for this. In 2005, Florida passed a stand your ground law. Advocates for the law claimed it would reduce crime, while opponents argued it would increase the use of lethal force. Let's stay out of the political arguments over this policy and approach it from a data science perspective. If you wanted to use data to answer this question, and you came across this graphic published by the news organization Reuters, what would you conclude? I'll give you a few seconds to think it over. If your initial reaction was gun deaths decreased, you aren't alone. The last few times I've shown this visual in class, that's been the first reaction I got. However, look closer at the graph. In particular, look at the numbers on the vertical axis. What do you see? You see the axis starts at 0 at the top of the plot, not at the bottom. This violates our expectation that 0 starts in the lower left of a plot, and leads to misinterpretation and confusion. The visualization's creator explained on Twitter why she decided to make the plot look this way. She wanted to have deaths shown in negative terms with an inverted axis, and was also inspired by the graphic on the right, which visualized the death toll in Iraq after the 2003 invasion. In this instance, there wasn't an explicit intent to deceive, but that doesn't prevent it from spreading misinformation. For the second example, consider this plot of the average annual global temperature from the 1880s up to the recent past. This visualization was tweeted out on December 14th, 2015 by the political magazine National Review. The image itself was originally posted on a lesser-known political blog called Powerline. The data in this plot is real. Does this visualization suggest that you draw a certain conclusion about how average global temperatures have changed over time? Now here's the more conventional way that this dataset is plotted. Notice that the vertical axis scale is much reduced so that you can better understand the variations in the data. Also, the data is plotted as a deviation from a baseline value instead of as a raw average. Scales matter in scientific plots, and the axis range you select should either allow you to see the trends or be fixed by known maximums and minimums that allow you to better judge the trend's effect size. A quick side note, if you're wondering how we have a temperature record going back to the 1880s, here's why. Temperatures from the 1800s and onward were recorded using thermometers at various locations around the globe, and by the 1880s, thermometers had become precise. Systematic measurements began around the mid-1800s at various army posts, and in 1891, the National Weather Service was formed to continue the effort. Let us close by outlining a list of ethics and principles for creating scientific visualizations based on everything we've discussed. 1. Present your results transparently and honestly. 2. Show all data, including outliers that are valid measurements. 3. Use graph layouts that show trends and lets readers easily read quantitative values. 4. Do not break conventions regarding scaling, axis orientation, the type of plot to use, etc. 5. If you leave something out of a visualization, say so and justify it. And 6. Strongly consider including your dataset and any scripts used to create figures with your reports or journal articles.